it felt like Nirvana was a sort of a hybrid of those sort of garage band post-punk. I don't know how else to place the replacements in there, and that sort of the metal on some level.
I wouldn't necessarily call them post-punk. I think they are a part of punk. I also equate. I've also played with a lot of those post-punk bands. I'm talking like the first wave English late 70s bands. So I don't put them in that category because I don't think they are post-punk. I think if anything, they are the Clinton punk, if you will. But ultimately it becomes important music to the journalists that are writing about it. And no matter what Kurt Cobain tries to do to shed this pop culture fame, it just becomes more and more marketable. It's there's some Mark Fischer quotes in the piece because Fischer actually wrote about Nirvana. He was a music journalist as well as a great writer with capitalist realism. And I think his critique of Cobain, the paradox of his fame, that and drug addiction had a lot to do with his suicide, because the thing about the culture of authenticity is you're constantly kicking people out, like you said earlier, that get a certain level of fame because they're not real. And we see it here as well on the online left, right? And these two cultures, the culture of deconstruction, which is basically just the culture of no. That's it. We had Vijay Prashad on our show one day, and we were talking about the contemporary, mostly online left, let's be realistic. And he goes, you just can't be no all the time. He said, you have to give people something to want to fight for. We've had Shahid Bhutar. I'm friends with Shahid Bhutar. He's like, we've critiqued enough. We need solutions. This music doesn't give you solutions. It's not supposed to give you solutions because you have authenticity on one side and you have deconstruction on the other side, and they're working hand in glove to pretty much keep the scene very, very small. There's really no infrastructure built in to propel anybody into the mainstream to try to deconstruct the mainstream, because that's not really a goal.
And I mean, let's move into that parallel with the online left, because this is where you sort of take that turn. And like from my perspective, like with the Squad, for instance, we're looking at politicians who are bringing stuff from the outside into the halls where there's institutional power. And of course, that's going to mean like, you got to do the music video that MTV, like to sort of like cross it. They're going to do that video. And that is, they're doing that music video so that they can expand their base and bring that music to a different audience. I mean, that to me feels like what, where we have been at. And on some level, those people who were pissed about Nevermind, that down at the Middle East, that it was getting so much attention, that's sort of the stage that we've been in since Bernie's lost in 2020 on some level, which is like, let's just tear it down for the most part. And if it's not it that we're tearing down, it's just like, let's train that fire all around us on some level. And nothing's being constructed, and nothing like, I think there's been a massive failure by the Democratic leadership, let's say, for pushing a lot of these, in the way that they tried to sell this big bill. But there has been a shocking absence of any type of organization, not just with the online left. I think, like, sort of broadly speaking, of like, where are the people advocating for? I mean, free community college is not free college, but it's free community college. Where are the people advocating for parental leave? Where are the people? Like, where is this happening?
This gets into deconstruction, right? Because then you hear people say shit like this. How many times have you guys said this? And Matt, please jump in if you hear me on this. It's not enough. A little social democracy in America would go a long fucking way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Please don't call me a reformist. I'm just being realistic. When I was working a regular job before the fame and riches of podcasting, I worked with the unhoused. A little bit of social democracy goes a long fucking way. When Gavin Newsom goes, and it wasn't his decision because he was sitting in a room and figured, I figured it out. When he got pushed by activists to use vacant hotels to house homeless people, you got the COVID numbers down. We got to house people in their own individual units with their own showers. Were there problems with it? Hell yeah. Did I have to fucking stop dudes from beating the shit out of their women? Hell yeah. Did I see kids that had dropped out of school in the second grade that couldn't read? Hell yeah. There's problems. But the first step has to be the housing. But if I poo-poo the project as a massive failure, it didn't work out as well in LA as it did in the Bay Area, then it's hard to get anything done.
And how much of that too is just this internalized, I don't want to say trauma, but yeah, trauma, I guess, throughout society, that trying or working hard and taking these steps of progress, that's harder than just saying tear it all down. And it opens you up like emotionally, and it opens your hopes up to something that might not work out and might let you down.
And what happens when the machine, and the machine in this sense is capitalism, how do you fight the machine? When you, as my co-host who's been on this show, Pascal Robert, says, there is no left in America. We have a bunch of leftists. And the left doesn't have enough power to pop a fucking grape. So what happens when you elect powerless people into state and federal office when there's no true infrastructure there to support them? There's no grassroots movements outside of maybe some sort of electoral movement to really push any sort of agenda. You will get consumed by the machine, right? Kurt Cobain could have stayed on Sub Pop. Nirvana could have stayed on Sub Pop. I don't know that they sell 11 million records with that exact same album, Nevermind, because remember, that was done on Sub Pop. But they break out into the mainstream, and there's really no infrastructure there to support them other than the mainstream infrastructure. And even when we look at these cultures of authenticity in the underground, they're literally modeled off the bigger capitalist ones. Why does SST lose all those bands? Because they're not paying the fucking bands. You know who else doesn't pay bands? Major labels.
Right.
So as I'm watching people fight, I'm asking myself, is your fight a legitimate frustration, or is it a brand exercise? Because much like these bands from the 80s, when the 90s hit and this genre called pop punk came to be, Green Day, Blink-182, maybe you can throw bands like Rancid in. And again, these are some people that I personally know. And I'm not saying this as a pejorative, but and I don't think they said, hey guys, we're like punk, but like not frightening. Like, I don't think that was their goal, because to them, they are just like those 80s bands, because those 80s bands come out of suburban nuclear families as well, right? But the fame that they get, because after Nirvana, you get Dookie, and it's like, dude, we can monetize rebellion. You start to get the blow up of Hot Topic stores where, Sam, I believe you have a teenage daughter.
I do.
I have a 23-year-old daughter, but I do have teenage boys. And
you also see Kirsten Cinema on a regular basis, right? She seems to shop at Hot Topic.
No, that's what's the older version? There's like an older version of Hot Topic. Wet Seal?
I don't know. Not exactly sure.
Is Wet Seal still a thing? But you know what I mean? Like, you can get rebellion at Hot Topic. When I saw an Anarchy shirt for sale, I was like, word? That was something that you made. And when you even watch like Cobain made a Flipper shirt. That was his favorite band, but he couldn't get one because they didn't mass produce merchandise. Those guys were all fucking dope fiends trying to just get to the next town. So when you see this stuff blow up and mall culture blow up, and these original dudes are sitting by, they're like, punk is dead. F these guys. They're playing these big festivals. Warped Tour is a corporate festival. Vans is a major corporation. It's owned by another company. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. Please don't think there's some stoner in a garage making slip-on checkerboard Vans. They are part of a major multinational conglomerate. So these guys are seeing the aesthetic they created, selling millions of records, playing bigger rooms. Eventually, they start getting on Warped Tour. Warped Tour's got an old fucking band stage. There's a name for it. I can't think of the name for it, you know. And now these guys are getting their own edition of Vans. There's a Bad Brains Vans edition, right? You can go into a Hot Topic right now with your teenage daughter, and she can go run to the anime / Hot Topic band section, and there is a section for Sam Seder with Minor Threat shirts that you never got to get as a young person, right? Bill collector. Sorry.
Well, I mean that was like the. I mean, there's this is a to a certain extent. There's a situationist. This is the situationist. Sort of like the spectacle just absorbs everything ultimately, and these there is no ability to sort of stand outside of it. And there was this concept, particularly around the 90s, I think it was, when I remember Mort Saul actually was talking about there is no selling out anymore. It's just you buying in. And you there is no, you can't stand outside of that machine on some level. And then it becomes largely a branding exercise because you don't know how to both express the frustration, but you also well, I want somebody to hear me express my frustration. So I've got
I'm gonna play in a room full of people. Look, man, you did comedy. You ever done comedy for The Bartender?
Well, yeah, actually I did for a very long time. In fact, that's probably
sucks.
Well,
and you're friends with David Cross. David Cross is one of my favorite comedians. If it wasn't for David Cross, I wouldn't even know that this show existed. I saw David Cross in this show hella years ago, and I was like, oh, this is his comedy review show. And I found out it wasn't. But
there was many times I performed comedy for The Bartender and David Cross, and still Cross would just literally physically mess with me on stage to impress the bartender. And that was basically it. I mean, there was maybe 4 or 5 other people.
Get more free drinks.
Right. I mean,
you already are given.
But the point being, at one point, that becomes unsatisfying, right? Like at one point, you need to have an audience
in front of people. And the thing is, when you get to a certain point, there's a great interview for people watching the show. There's a really good interview with Henry Rollins in like '86. It's somewhere in the middle of the country. I want to say he's in like Dearborn, Michigan. And the kid interviewing them after the show is basically trying to say, are you guys sellouts now because you grew your hair long and you slowed the music down? So around this record called My War by Black Flag, the most punk rock thing they can do is like slow shit down. We're going to grow our hair out, partially because why the fuck not? We're always gone. We don't have time to fucking look cute for you. And Rollins is kind of a douche in the interview to this young kid, but it's again that culture of authenticity. Like, oh, you sold out now because you played in front of, you know, maybe a few thousand people, which isn't that big when you think about it, because that was the max that those guys really got. They never played arenas,
right?
Never. And it's real interesting as Rollins is kind of trying to make the kid say, well, tell me why I'm a sellout. You know, what about me is selling out? We're dirty. We have no money. And we're going to spend it trying to get to the next goddamn city. So what about me is selling out? And when you look at the online left and certain people are sellouts and this, that, and the third, it's like, well, why are they sellouts? What is making this person a sellout? Is it you don't like what they have to say? Is it that you think they're trying to get on MSNBC? Because I got bad news for people. That shit ain't easy to get on MSNBC. You can't just go down there and be like, I want to get on MSNBC. Right?
You really need somebody who they want on to leverage you on. That's basically what happened with me. I wanted Janine on, and she said, I'll come on if Sam comes on with me. That's basically how I started my career to get onto that place. But that happens very rarely.
Very, very rarely. But it's hella easy for people to call you a sellout for trying to get your message out to a broader audience. But it's also very easy to get co-opted by trying to get to a broader audience. And so why I brought all that stuff up about the 90s and pop punk is these bands that were saying punk is dead later start playing the corporate festivals. They start getting corporate endorsements. Some of them get major label deals. Some of them, if they had a little independent label, it got bought out by a major. So they are the facade that is the undergroundness of the major label that's running everything. And you start to ask yourself, are you raging against the machine? Or are you raging to be a part of the machine? Or does the machine just consume you?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is, I mean, we don't have, and we have not had a counterculture in this country since the 80s. And I think I first sort of like, and maybe before then, but certainly I saw it in the context of, you know, in the early 90s with this sort of rise of independent film. And I was a Cassavetes fan, and I realized just, you know, and I had done a very low budget film at that time, and realized, like, even going around, that unless somebody's film had gotten bought, I didn't care about it either. like mine wasn't bought. And I was like, I know I knew it wasn't, you know, a masterpiece, but I know like it had some value, but there was no counterculture. There was no place where this could be seen, even at the festivals, as the festivals became markets as opposed to exhibition, you know, like circuits of exhibition, they became markets. And I was like, you know, if I'm talking to somebody and they tell me their film hasn't sold after playing at 2 or 3 festivals, my immediate reaction is, can't be good.
Film sucks.
Good. And even though I knew that, like, that was exactly the case with my movie at the time, and I didn't think that my movie was garbage, but I like would catch myself sort of having that immediate reaction because at one point, I don't know, it was probably during the 80s, this concept of, if it has no commercial viability, it is not, there is no support mechanism. There is no system in which it can be valued, because there was a time in our society where like there were infrastructures and support systems and compensation, not in the form of money, but in terms of like esteem, or you could get famous in circles.
You could get a film made,
commercial success.
You could show it. You could show it at bars and underground places and art houses. You kind of see a little bit of that now, right? Because there's just a ton of film festivals for everything. But on a larger scale, let's pull back a little bit and look at this from a larger scale, again using pop culture. Two humongously successful movies, financially and critically, is Nomadland, which is a horrible take on a good book, and Parasite.
Yeah.
Snowpiercer, which is a very anti-capitalist movie by the same person that did Parasite, is a TV show. We can sell anti-capitalism.
Well, it was a movie first, right? I mean, I have seen the movie. I don't know what the TV show's like, but I can't imagine that it's like more edgy than what
it's like the prequel, right? It's the story. Remember the frozen people on the side, and they're like, those were the big. But again, this is the most anti-capitalism, ham-fisted movie around. Snowpiercer, right? Yeah. Poor people in the back. They are the fodder for the engine. If I'm spoiling anything for you, that movie's been out for like 5 years. You should have watched it. Parasite, another great movie about class and capitalism. The Joker, a very anti-neoliberal movie where Batman's family are the villains. The rich people are the villains in this movie. And these are massive, major Hollywood productions. And again, I bring this up because it's back to that machine situation. Does it just consume you when there really is no infrastructure and there really is no vision to see how I can get through to the mainstream? Because the one thing about the culture of deconstruction and the culture of authenticity is it never has an entryway into the mainstream to deconstruct the mainstream so you can have your utopian world, right? And then you have so many people that have grown up in an era of reality television and branding, that one of the main occupations that younger people want to have is influencer.
Right.
Have you ever been around a bunch of influencers? Shit sucks.
Well, there's some really good writing about how that was around, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago, about the Facebook and Instagram essentially teaching people to commodify themselves. And I mean, to the point where now it almost seems like, well, yeah, no, of course. Like, is that controversial? And what's wrong with that? I mean, to the point where like there was a time, almost probably less than a decade ago, where that was sort of controversial. Do you really want to commodify yourself and get, put yourself in the, I've earned, my being has earned a certain amount of likes today. And, that was nuts. But all right, well, listen, I would love to continue this conversation because it fascinates me, and I can't encourage people to read your piece enough. And, maybe we can sort of like move on to the implications of where it leaves the online left even more.
That's the next piece that I'm working on, because my big fear is I shouldn't say fear, but what I'm starting to notice is that this is just a branding exercise. Ultimately, that's all it becomes.
What, the online left, or yes? I mean, I think so much of it. And maybe there's a certain inevitability. My perspective on like what, I entered into it before there was an online left. Actually, it was just.
I sent you, and I'll say this on air because I want to put you on the spot. We did send you an email because we want to get you on the show to talk about.
Yes, I know.
Your early days in Air America and the idea of a leftist mainstream.
I will do. I cannot tell you how far behind I am on such things, but I think that the what was, at least in my mind when I entered in, and it was a different medium, and so it functioned in a different way, and it could function in a different way, was to amplify people who didn't have access to, I'm on mass radio. We're on in LA, we're on in New York, we're on in Chicago, we're on in Miami and Dallas, in 8 of the top 10 markets in the country. And from Chris Hayes to Glenn Greenwald to Chalmers Johnson to whoever it was, it's like we have the ability to actually amplify voices that are important voices, and that was what our function was. But then when everybody is on a platform where everybody has the same sort of you don't need 10 stations, you don't need a tower, you're also not going to reach, unless you're one of those rare people, millions of people on a daily basis. Then it becomes well, what is the function of this? If you're not, how much are you going to be able to amplify people? And if you're not able to amplify people, how do you, there's a lot more questions to it, but when are you going to be done with that piece, man?
I always run this stuff by Pascal.
Let's go. Let's pick it.
And I always have to run it by Teray Reed. So I have to run everything by those, the council of great thought. And once the council approves it, then I can post it up. But that is the next piece. And also I have to get off these dating apps. That's really what's happening right now.
I hear you on both. Maybe that'll be the third piece that you write, and we can talk about that. We'll do the whole series. We're going to put a link to your Medium piece. Jason Myles, can't tell you how much I really appreciate this conversation and the piece itself. I mean, frankly, it really is. I found it really interesting.